Good. I knew that would bring out a few. Yeah, as I said, we discussed what I could talk about here because this is a bunch of astronomers and I do biology, if you haven't noticed. So we struggled a little bit. I thought first, well, I'm also an atheist, so I could spend an hour cursing God in the heavens.
Please.
Okay, curse God. We can do that. But no, we settled on this topic, which I talked about at the amazing meeting last year, and that is the evolution of aliens. We don't have any aliens. We haven't actually looked at them. So this is going to be a little bit of a speculative talk, but I think what I can do is I can teach you a little bit about evolutionary biology as we go along. As it says up there, there's the URL for my site if you want to come visit sometime. Feel free to stop by FreeThoughtBlogs anytime. The name is PZ Myers, but I speak Canadian, and if you say PZ, I'm okay with that. Okay, so what are we going to talk about? Well, those of you who were here early enough were watching those spectacular videos that Larry put up, and he had that wonderful one with the Kepler data showing all those extrasolar planets. So here's something pathetic compared to that. This is just a diagram to illustrate the concept that we found these thousands of extrasolar planets out there. Many of them obviously not suited for our kind of life, but others are falling into habitable zones, and we're all speculating, okay, who lives there? What lives there? What kind of creatures will we find? These planets are all over the place now, and they're not too surprising actually. We've got empirical data that shows them, but it's also not surprising because you could use physics to kind of figure out that when solar nebulae collapse, they're going to produce things like planets, little clumps in their condensations. So these have been modeled by physics as well, so the modeling is there. In the case of life, we're not so solidly based. We do not have empirical data about life on other planets. We have some rough models of the origin of life that suggest it's probably likely. But if you ask most biologists, they would say, yes, certainly there's going to be life on other planets, because life is nothing but chemistry. And I understand that on other planets there would be chemistry. Okay? There's probably also physics going on. And if you've got physics and chemistry going on, we say naturally life is going to emerge on some significant fraction of them. So there's going to be life out there. The question is just, what would that life look like? What do we think we would see if we got up there? Now, this, for instance, this is a lovely circular cladogram that's illustrating animal life on the planet. Well, my laser pointer will tell you kind of what you're looking at. What a circular cladogram does is it plots time with the origin of life down here at the center, and everything around the outer edge is extant animals. So we're looking at modern times here and ancient times as you get deeper and deeper in the middle. And so what this is just illustrating is the pedigree of all these different forms of life on the planet. So there, for instance, there's mice. People are somewhere right around here. There's birds, there's worms, there's flies, there's fish, there's frogs, all these creatures scattered around there. Now, one question that's out there is, does this kind of diagram completely describe the morphological potential of life? Is this an optimum constrained by functionality? That is, if we had another planet and it evolved animal life, would we also draw the same, roughly similar diagram for the life we find there? Because one argument that's often made is that sure, you can imagine weird forms, you can imagine very bizarre forms, but none of those forms outside of this little circle here are viable. They're just too weird, can't possibly exist. So we can exclude them. So what this is a complete mapping of all the kinds of life that might exist in the universe. But we know already that that's not true. These, as I said, all the ones around the periphery here, are the extant species. So this does not include trilobites and Tyrannosaurus rex. Forms that we know were incredibly successful, that existed for long periods of time, that thrived that could be on this diagram aren't because they happened to die out 70 million years ago. So the question is really, can life include forms beyond these, beyond the extinct forms? Can it include forms that are really, really weird, that we've never encountered but only imagined? And there's two schools of thought. One says, no, that selection is very efficient, and the diversity of life on this planet represents an evolutionary optimum, and that any planet with similar conditions should evolve similar forms. They'd be different in detail, but sure, intelligent aliens could be bipedal humanoids. Maybe they'd be little and green, like this, but they look roughly like us. So there's a lot of latitude in these fine details, but in general, bipedal intelligent forms are successful on this planet, so we predicted they would be successful on other planets. Now, the other school of thought, though, emphasizes chance and contingency, that we aren't shaped purely by selective forces, that we do not actually represent a perfect optimum. Any of you who have bad backs know that our form is not ideal. There's compromises made here. So the reason I am a biped is that my ancestors were tetrapods. That's the key thing that limits the shape I can have. It's not because I could have possibly had any other shape, that my lineage could have gone in any direction. My lineage was constrained by its history. And because we evolved from four-legged animals, we're allotted four limbs, and that's it. That's all we can produce. If I were derived from a hexapod like this, I might look very different. But those hexapods don't exist on this planet. But maybe they could on another planet. That's the issue. So we've got really two opposing views. One that we call a Panglossian model, and it says humans are an ideal type, so we should expect intelligent aliens in other worlds to look something like us. And the other model is the chance and contingency model that considers contemporary vertebrates to be a poor example of the range of possibilities. And I'm going to argue in this talk primarily for the chance and contingency model. I think it best fits how we think about evolutionary biology nowadays. But first I have to confess that the Panglossian model is kind of popular. It captures a lot of imagination. Lots of people think this way. So for example, this was in the news about a year ago. A Reuters report from this fellow who's speaking at a forum on search for extraterrestrial life. He says, okay, there's lots of planets out there, and this is what kind of floored all the biologists is. They blithely went on to say, aliens would most likely resemble humans with 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head. Why? Why should we expect that? There's a couple of reasons that this expectation is ingrained in us. Part of it is the media. The media kind of glibly reports this stuff. If you read the Weekly World News or something, they regularly have their little big-headed gray aliens on the cover, that kind of sort of stuff. But that's the media, the popular model of what aliens look like. The ones in the flying saucers that are everywhere, right? They're all little bipedal, humanoid-type creatures. It's also pervasive in our culture with media that constantly portrays fictional aliens as looking almost like us. They're either taller and bluer. This is a pretty common sort of thing. Is just change their color. Oh, there you've got an alien. Green, blue, those are popular colors. Or you put little latex appliances on their head and make them pointy ears or whatever. These are ways to portray aliens that are cheap and easy. It's often done for very good reasons. For if you're doing a drama, if you had something like that hexapod I showed you earlier, it'd be really hard to relate to it. And imagining kissing it just doesn't work very well with romantic science fiction stories. And then there are also serious, renowned paleontologists, legitimate scientists, like I'll mention one, Simon Conway Morris, who wrote a whole book titled Life Solution, in which he argued that the ultimate goal of evolution was intelligent humanoids who could understand God's word. Yes, he not only believes in humanoid aliens, he also believes in Jesus in heaven. He also believes Jesus was visited every one of these planets, which sort of puts a different perspective on what he's saying. But he's a very well-known scientist. He's the preeminent scholar of the Burgess Shale, for instance. He's the paleontologist who studies those things that you find here in Canada. So he wrote a whole book on this, and his final chapter was this fantasy in very purple prose in which a trio of aliens land on his lawn and walk up on two legs and look at him with two eyes and ask to come in for tea. So not only is evolution driving towards humans as life solutions, but they're all going to be British. This terrifies me. Another example, and this is a Canadian display. It's in the National Museum of Canada in Ottawa. That creature on the right, the real one over there, that's a troodon. It was a real theropod that lived in the late Cretaceous. It was relatively large-brained, and it led the creator of this particular diagram to speculate, well, what if a meteor hadn't wiped out all dinosaurs, giving troodon the opportunity to evolve tool using intelligence? Setting aside the obvious fact that troodon was a successful beast as it was, its species existed for millions of years and had plenty of opportunity to evolve into something else that were going to evolve into something else. And there was not necessarily any evolutionary incentive to become more intelligent. The creator made that very, very silly mannequin on the left, suggesting that one perfectly serviceable saurian biped would abandon its functional form to look more like a scaly ape, or maybe a David Icke wet dream or something. This is a really good biped. Why do you have to go to an ape model? This is a perfectly viable, just not given a bigger brain, that would have been quite believable. Now all this is absurd for reasons I'll explain by giving you some evolutionary basics that apply here. First of all, it isn't entirely crazy to argue for humanoids. And there's a perfectly good observed phenomenon that forms a rationale. It's called convergence. And Simon Conway Morris in his book talks extensively about convergence. It's a basis for his argument, largely, other than his belief in Jesus. If you take organisms with initially similar body plans and you put them in environments where there is selection for a particular function or a particular ecological niche to fill, you'll sometimes see superficially similar forms emerge. On the left, that's a thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger. It's a presumably extinct marsupial. People in Australia occasionally report still seeing them. It's kind of like Bigfoot in the United States and Canada, but they've got their Tasmanian wolf tiger that they're looking for. They occasionally see this, but it really went extinct back in the 20s and 30s. And on the right over here, there's a gray wolf. You should be able to see just looking at these, and looking also at those skulls. These are predators that independently, on different continents, evolved to be fast, active hunters with fang jaws. And they do look very similar. This is what we mean by convergence. You've taken a marsupial, you've taken a true mammal, and they've evolved in similar directions to fill the role of a top social predator. And there's a good form for that. If you're a tetrapod, you make a wolf-like creature. Of course, when you look in detail at the anatomy, things like the shapes of the jaws, what particular bones are all involved in these particular processes, the difference is leap attitude. And also, I would say that if you put a wolf and a thylacine together, they would not be confused at all. That other creature would be something in the uncanny valley. It would look very alien. The thylacine would look bizarre to the wolf would look bizarre to the alien, or to the thylacine. They would not confuse themselves with each other, and they would probably kill each other rather than trying to mate with each other. And I would concede that if a primitive primate is somehow colonizing the alien world, so if the astronomers here get together, build some rocket ships, and fire off chimpanzees to one of those worlds that have been, those Earth-like worlds that have been discovered, and somehow got them to survive the trip and colonize it, they would give rise to intelligent tool users that would probably look humanoid, because they're humanoid to start with. They look humanoid at least as much as the thylacine looks like a wolfoid. But there's a catch. With a different genetic stock, there are many different solutions to the same fundamental problem. We're cheating a little bit by using tetrapods and having them converge because they'll come up with the same solutions. That there are many different ways to solve the similar sorts of problems that we encounter. consider, first of all, just the example of bipedalism. Now, there's no particular reason to think bipedalism is a necessary hallmark of your intelligent aliens, but there's different ways to do this. So, for example, here's a collection of bipeds. So there's our type. That's very familiar. But look here, this is a kangaroo. A kangaroo is also a biped. Do you confuse kangaroo locomotion with human locomotion? No, not at all. They look very, very different. They follow very, very different strategies. You look at the ostrich, that's also another biped. You look at those limbs bend though, and there's no confusion. That's a different strategy for moving. And of course we have these extinct forms, like the theropods, that similarly have this bipedal form, a very successful, very good bipedal form that's very different from our particular brand of bipedalism. So there's many different solutions to one problem. If you're just postulating, well, we're going to make an alien that we can use in our movies that fits our model of what an alien looks like, it just has to be bipedal. There's a lot of ways you can do that. It's saying already that constraint to a particular pattern isn't necessarily present in life. Now, trying to find bipeds outside the tetrapod lineage is really hard. They don't seem to exist. So I dug around, I looked. I mean, this is the closest thing I can find to it, is a praying mantis, okay? They have the kind of erect posture, they get kind of vertical, they got their forelimbs hanging out there that they use to rip things apart. So they have some characteristics with us. But of course, they're actually hexapods, and there's 4 legs that they're walking on. That's the closest you can come to a biped outside of the tetrapod lineage. Anything we find on another planet is not going to be a tetrapod. It's going to be something completely different. So we wouldn't expect it would follow the same pattern as other things look like. Bipedalism is really nothing more than an oddball vertebrate artifact. It's just a coincidence having only 4 limbs, and if you're going to free up 2 to do something different, then only use 2 to walk in. That's a pretty pathetic excuse for being bipedal, but that's all we got. And we go further too. We ask, okay, well, there's certain familiar attributes we expect of our aliens when we look at them. The kinds of things we see in these creatures is, oh, we expect to see 2 eyes and jaws and a nose, but it turns out that's not a necessary arrangement either. If we just look at, for instance, arthropod faces, those of you who are screaming shit about bugs, I'm sorry, you're suffering right now. Close your eyes for a moment, I'll let you know when I move on. See, if any of these guys were to land on your front lawn and ask you for a cup of tea, you would not confuse them with Jason Nishiyama, for instance. And you wouldn't think they were just British people visiting. No confusion at all. And it's not just superficial differences in appearance, it's not deep functional differences. So, these are all animals that have evolved these particular facial arrangements because they have functional roles. They've got things that they have to do. Whether it's a spider that has to suck fluids out of its prey, or there's various ants over here that manipulate things with their jaws, and there's plant sap sucking creatures like this. They all have these specializations that fit particular roles. So let's think about another example of very different solutions to a very common problem. And that problem is, how do you eat if you're in an aquatic environment? So how does an animal that lives in the ocean eat? It turns out this is not a trivial problem. The reason is that water is a dense medium. And so there's your food sitting in front of you. If you rush towards it to eat it, when you rush forward, what you have to do is you have to push forward this column of water in front of you, this dense medium in front of you. And what it will do is it will effectively push your food item away from you. It's a huge problem in aquatic organisms, especially if you're a predator, because the last thing you want to do is give your prey an edge, and that rushing at them will also push them away from you. It assists in their escape. So you got to think about how you're going to catch that tasty food in front of you. And it turns out that bony fish have a number of brilliant solutions. One is that they have these toothy jaws just like us, but they have some other adaptations, including they have these opercula, these gill covers, and they have a large cavity in their mouth. What they do when they rush forward, and what only fish will do is a typical teleost, is they'll open their mouth very wide, and at the same time they flare those opercula. Basically, they create a huge suction by increasing the volume of the space in their mouth. So as they're rushing forward, they're simultaneously gulping down all the water in front of them, and hopefully gulping down the prey, and then closing their jaws and eating it. In this case, this is an animal that's really gone above and beyond the call. This is a moray eel. It's got the same problem. It's got to rush forward and catch its food. And when it rushes forward, what it does is it opens its jaws wide, so again, increase that volume, sucking in this huge volume of water. And then this is the most bizarre thing. They've adapted a couple of their gill arches. They've got teeth on the gill arches, and they've got these special muscles forming a sling. And at the same time they rush forward to engulf the prey, they shoot their inner jaws forward to clamp down the prey, hold it in place. So the jaws clamp down, and then the main jaws are free to sort of chomp and chew and tear the prey apart. So this is one way to get around the problem. You may have seen something like this on It actually has a real-life analog, this internal jaw. It's a beautiful structure, but it's an example of the kinds of things you have to do if you're living in dense medium trying to capture prey in front of you. Anyway, there's another way to solve this though, and it's not in fish. Fish have this solution. Lots of fish have very extreme oral adaptations in order to facilitate prey capture. It's one of the things that drives the speciation of fishes. But another very successful animal is the squid, which does something very different. So these are a series of frames from a high-speed cinematographic record of squid catching a shrimp. Each frame is separated by 10 milliseconds. So this whole movie covers only about an eighth of a second. This is an eye blink in what they do. And what you see here in the first frame is here's the squid here, there's its eyes, there's its tentacles. What it does is it bunches of tentacles in front of it to form like a spear point. It's very streamlined that way. So everything's kind of packed down like this. And then what they do, and here's the shrimp up there, then what it does is it advances towards it, and then at the last minute, it takes 8 of its 10 tentacles and peels them back like this, making this beautiful little flower of squid tentacles. And the 2 central tentacles are thrust forward like spears and capture the prey. Isn't that gorgeous? A little flower. That's what I think of this. It's just swimming along, just boom, splat, spears the prey. Just think, if you were swimming and a giant squid came along, you'd feel ennobled by such a... But you see, it's the same physical problem for both the fish and the squid. Dense medium, prey capture, you don't want to push the prey away. And it's 2 completely different, radically different biological solutions to this. And why do they differ this way? Is it that this is an optimum in one situation and the fish has an optimum in another situation? No, they're living in exactly the same environments. They're often feeding on the same prey. So you can't say there is one physical best way to do it. There are many best ways to do it. So the reason they differ so much is simply history. That these forms evolved from 2 very different body plans. So a little basic introduction to body plans here. At the top up here, this is a vertebrate, like us. This is the core of the vertebrate body plan. Is all vertebrates are glorified worms. Somebody can feel good. Our special characteristics are we have this central rod here. It's called a notochord. It later becomes skeletonized in vertebrates and forms your spinal column. So we've got this rigid spiny thing running into the animal. In the primitive ancestors, what it was a little spring. It allowed them to efficiently swim like a fish. So this is a springy little rod that stores energy and lets them efficiently propel themselves through the water. Other characteristics are they have a dorsal nerve cord, so that's the spinal cord and a little lump of a brain there. All that means is that where is our nervous system? It's here going down our back. It's not here going down our front. We've also got these things called pharyngeal gill slits. Okay, they're familiar in a fish. They look like gill slits in a fish. They look like that perfectly in a fish. We've taken those and we've modified those to make most of our face. So our jaws are actually modified gills. Various cartilages in our throat are modified gills. So that's part of our pattern. And then we also have this post-anal tail. You're saying, no, I do not. Yes, you did. When you were an embryo, you look just like this. It's just that we bipedal apes, as we develop as an embryo, resorb that tail, we shrink it up and make it disappear. But most tetrapods have that tail, and we have it as embryos. Now, what about things like arthropods? What about things like squid? What have they got? They've got a very different foundation. This is the foundation of the arthropod body plan, which is, you can see it's got a couple of differences here. One is limbs. They have limbs all over the place. Every segment of their worm-like ancestor contained a pair of limbs reaching out. Notice we did not. Our limbs, our legs and arms, were secondary additions late in evolution. We got robbed. These guys, they got limbs all over the place. That's why when you think of insects and crustaceans and things like that, and squid, it's just legs all over the place, and it kind of creeps some people out. But this is the foundation of the body plan. The other thing they have is they don't have a notochord. So they don't have an internal skeleton like we do. Instead, they've got an external skeleton. They've got the cuticle on the outside, which is hard to show in this diagram. But yeah, their skeleton is an exoskeleton. And another feature is that their nervous system is a ventral one. Yes, they actually have a nerve cord that runs this way, down the length of their belly. So yes, if you're ever attacked by a giant insect and you want to kill it, go for the middle of the thorax. That's where the nervous system is. See, this is talking to me, all kinds of useful hints. It actually causes some problems for arthropod evolution because having it there means that their brains actually have to wrap around their throats. So every time a squid or an insect swallows, it actually stretches its brain to swallow the food passing. So there's some cute things going on. So we've got these very different body plans, and what these have done, they've constrained the ways that we can evolve. If you are a chordate, a vertebrate like this, you can't rely on a bunch of limbs. You don't have a bunch of legs all over the place. That's why we're limited. I only have 4. Is because of this evolutionary error, you could call it. But on the other hand, this is a really good form for swimming. It's efficient, torpedo shape, it gets you through the water pretty quickly. These guys, the arthropods, on the other hand, they've got limbs galore. Their specialization is deadly hugs. They're really good at that. But they're not so great at swimming. So, you could argue that this is one of the pinnacles of vertebrate evolution. This is the perfection of the chordate form in a fish like this. There are over 30,000 species of fish. So hands down, this is the most successful vertebrate solution ever. Note some of the features here. It's got that beautiful streamlined form. It's torpedo shaped. Its internal skeleton is a flexible spring, that notochord that I mentioned earlier, and it's flanked by these big slabs of muscle, tasty muscle, that propel it through the water. And the front end, what you find, is a sensory array. That's where all this stuff up here is. There's eyes, there's pressure olfactory sensors, and there's also these elaborate jaws, which are a prey capture mechanism. So you could say this is the perfect product of adaptive function. For living in an aquatic environment, it seems very logical. You ought to be torpedo-shaped. You ought to have sensory organs in the front. You ought to have whatever device you're going to use to catch prey up in the front. This is perfection, right? This is the only way you can do this. Surely, every planet we visit someday may not have intelligent life on it, but it's got to have fisheries, right? Fishy-like features is what you think. But hang on. Here's the perfect product of adaptive evolution. First of all, physics does dictate that torpedo shape. You know, if you're going to slip through the water, you need to be hydrodynamically streamlined. So yeah, you want to be torpedo shaped. But there are many arrangements of the body that can do that. So here, in this squid, notice the sensory array is not at the front, it's mid-body. It's square in the middle of the animal. And what the front is dominated by is appendages. Here we have a whole bunch of limbs sitting up front. So if you're going to be doing prey capture, having 8 or 10 limbs up front, beautiful design. This is a great way to do it. There is no internal skeleton at all, so there's no springy internal skeleton at all. Instead, the movement in these guys is achieved by either flying through the water with these muscular fins along the side, or they actually use jet propulsion. They suck water into the body cavity and they squirt it out through a tube. Jet propulsion, right? Okay, this is the pinnacle of evolution. What I want to get across to those, no, it's not. There's many different ways to solve the same problem. Here on this planet, we see exhibited two, bony fish versus squid. Very different patterns of locomotion, very different strategies for capturing prey, very different kinds of organisms. So why should we expect that any life on another planet would be confined to one pattern or the other? So I would say that fishoids aren't necessarily interplanetary universes. But let's not go the other way and suggest that squidoids are either. The answer is that nature is always going to surprise us with novel solutions, and working backwards to make a Panglossian rationalization that every solution we've got represents the best of all possible solutions is a fallacy. So again, why does squid look different from fish? And again, I'll tell you, it's history. It's the body plan. It's where they come from.